From the National Catholic Register, this is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
EWTN News and Real Clear Opinion Research released a new poll on Catholic voters this week that shows Vice President Kamala Harris leading former President Donald Trump by 7 percentage points in the days after the Democratic National Convention. And unsurprisingly, it shows the economy as the top issue of concern. With us to discuss the numbers are reporters Peter Pinedo for Catholic News Agency and Peter Laffin for the National Catholic Register. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News and co-host of this show, Register Radio, joins me, Jeanette DeMello, your host, as we bring you the details of this poll and try to make sense of the Catholic vote. Then we turn to mission fields, far and wide, with Father Roger Landry, who was just named the new National Director for the Pontifical Mission Societies. How does the gospel mandate to go out to all the nations apply to all of us today? Join us in the second half of the show for that conversation. So, Matthew, we are looking at this new poll, and it seems to me the U.S. is still mission territory. Not only did we poll the EWTN News Real Clear Opinion Research poll, talk to Catholic voters about how they might vote in this upcoming election, but we also asked them about their Catholic belief and practice. And in my opinion, there's a lot to be desired. So can you tell us a little bit about what it found in terms of Catholic belief and practice?
Yeah, well, this is consistent with many of our findings over the last 5 years that we've partnered with Real Clear Opinion Research to track where Catholics are. And it's a little depressing when you consider that about 12% of American Catholics attend Mass daily or more than once a week. Only 31% go once a week. And then you have about a third of them, 32%, go just a few times a year. So clearly, while this is a slight improvement over some of the last few polls that we did, especially in 2022, this is still a pretty lamentable number. And then when you look at how Catholics are voting, or at least in our poll, Kamala Harris leads among every category of Mass-attending Catholics except for one, and that's daily Mass attendees who support President Trump, former President Trump, by a pretty significant margin. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And I like to point out that in a couple of regions, that also changes. That's the South and the Midwest. We're also attending Mass at greater frequencies and pulling towards Trump at greater frequencies. We probably won't get into too much about that in this show. We have so much to discuss, but there is this information at Catholic News Agency and National Catholic Register that our listeners can find there. But let's bring in the two Peters. We've got Peter Laffin for the National Catholic Register, who wrote an analysis piece, and Peter Pinedo, who wrote a piece for Catholic News Agency about Hispanic voters, which showed some interesting findings in this poll. So first of all, I'm going to bring on Peter Laffin. Peter Pinedo, thanks for being with us. Hold on a second. Please don't go anywhere. Let's first of all talk about, I guess, a general summary, and I'll kind of summarize it, and then we'll get right to you. So in the race for the White House, Vice President Kamala Harris leads among Catholic voters over Donald Trump. And we've also seen a significant gender gap, and the economy is the dominant issue in this election. It leads every other issue, immigration, abortion, healthcare, anything else, by a huge margin. So Peter, let's first talk about this gender gap. Women go for Harris 56% to 37%. Men go to Trump for 59% over 43%. What is going on here?
Well, I think many things are working together to create this increasing gender gap. But my mind goes first to the convention, to the two different conventions, and what the campaigns have been doing to attract male and female voters. If you remember night 4 of the Republican convention with Donald Trump, it was a pure testosterone show. You had Hulk Hogan ripping his shirt off. You had the UFC president giving the introduction, Kid Rock. And Trump comes on, the big Trump sign, very manly, very masculine. And then if you contrast that with night 4 of the Democratic National Convention, we hear this story about Kamala Harris's mother. And for the most part, the speech is very soft. And it's almost as if both of these campaigns are conscious of the fact that they need to drive up the gender that supports them in the vote as much as possible in order to win. Our poll has Trump ahead by, I think, six points among men, and Harris leads Trump among women by, a pretty staggering 19 points. And so it seems that she and the Democrats are doing a better job of driving up the women vote. I think another thing that plays into this is in really subtle and effective reframing that the Harris campaign has done to reframe Donald Trump not as a threat to democracy, which is how the Biden campaign had cast him, but rather as simply weird. And weird specifically for their retrograde-seeming ideas concerning women. The selection of J.D. Vance and the unearthed childless cat ladies remark and various other remarks that have come to light from Vance seem to have reinforced this idea that the Trump campaign is, potentially even hostile toward women. And I think those factors, more than anything, more than the issues, more than the economy, are driving this gender gap.
Peter, there's this always a working assumption of what one would call the Catholic vote. Historically, it voted in massive numbers, for example, for John F. Kennedy. We have seen it subsequently more divided among candidates like John Kerry and then, of course, President Biden. From your standpoint, in looking at a poll like this, how different at this point is the Catholic vote? Are Catholics following the general population?
Well, interestingly enough, if there is a quote-unquote Catholic vote, our poll, our numbers would show that Catholic vote is a bit more liberal than the general population. Most polls today have voters favoring Kamala Harris by a couple of points. Some have Trump up by 1. Ours has Harris up by 7. So if there is a Catholic vote, it's potentially a bit more to the left than the general population of America. But it is interesting to see how across the board strong these results are for the Harris campaign. As you mentioned earlier, she's leading in most regions. She's leading across age groups. Her numbers with Black and Latino voters are strong. They suggest that these would be good numbers for a Democratic win. And so, is there a Catholic vote that moves based on what the different campaigns are saying about policy? The answer, based on our polling, seems to be no. I think the life issue is really important here. We've seen and we've lamented for the last couple of months the Trump and Republican retreat from the pro-life position. And one can't help but wonder at this point if that retreat, if that softening on abortion has given voters the green light, Catholic voters the green light to vote for Kamala Harris. We didn't have polling, so we can't say whether or not that has changed anything. But certainly that's been raised by a number of prominent female Catholics in recent days.
Absolutely, and I would imagine it does play a part, and our poll did ask a question about abortion policy and whether it should be decided at the state legislatures or by the federal government or neither. And really a plurality of voters said neither. But that's 38%, 34% state legislators, and 29% the federal government. So it was really, really, people were divided on that very question, and we didn't dig any deeper. I do want to bring in Peter Pinedo. We have to talk about the Hispanic Catholic vote. The poll found that Kamala Harris leads 2-1 among Hispanic Catholics. So, Peter, before we actually talk a little bit more about our findings, the EWTN Real Clear findings, who is this Hispanic vote? I think it's very important to identify that these Hispanic voters are registered voters, right?
Right, definitely. And it's an important topic because, Pew Research kind of showed that they're projecting this year Hispanics are going to be making up a record high of the vote. It's 14.7% with 36.2 million Latinos registered to vote. So these are eligible voters, and it's a significant portion of the electorate here. So it's kind of it's a big deal what we're finding here.
Absolutely. And so, as I said, it's 2-1. Kamala Harris, and wow. So what we're seeing here is a definite amount of support for the Democratic ticket right now. How does it compare to the support for President Joe Biden in 2020?
Right. Well, like you mentioned, it's 2-1. So 59.4% of the Hispanic Catholics favoring Harris compared to the 30.4% favoring Trump. This is a really big deal. When you looked at just a couple of months ago, Pew took a poll and found that Hispanic Catholics were favoring Biden by just 2 points. It was 49% to 47%, which was also a huge decline from 2020 when we saw that Hispanics voted for Biden 59% compared to 38% for Trump. So it's the Hispanic vote, especially Hispanic Catholics, kind of been shifting over the last few years. But Harris entering the race, really, that changes all of that.
Yeah, Peter, as we're looking at this Latino vote, it's difficult to project exactly how this is going to play out. But what influence do we see in terms of Latino women or Hispanic women? Because we're seeing Harris have a pretty clear positioning with Catholic women voters overall.
Right. So unfortunately, our poll, it doesn't have too much of the breakdown on gender for the Hispanic vote, but we do know that the certain issues do plague things like abortion have kind of been propping up. And for that, the Hispanic Catholics are pretty split on whether or not abortion is really a big deal. Obviously, the economy has kind of been the biggest issue for this election, and that's definitely true for Hispanics. But when we asked Hispanics what their opinion on whether abortion should be a federal issue, it was very evenly split, and then about 40% saying that it's neither. So we don't have so much of the data of the breakdown for Hispanic Catholics by gender, but we know that these issues are kind of what's shaping their views.
You know, one thing I was very interested in about the Hispanic vote, and this is actually Hispanic Catholics that we surveyed, that EWTN News surveyed, they went to confession at a higher rate than non-Hispanics. So that was among, when we talked about their practice and their beliefs, about 19% of Catholic voters overall that we surveyed go to confession at least once a year. But there were a lot more Hispanics, I think somewhere around 63% who went at least once a year. So that was a very interesting finding, Peter.
You kind of see that the U.S. bishops, they've been prioritizing a lot of evangelization to Hispanic communities, and I think this is kind of a little bit of the fruits of that. So it's great to see that, if you said 63.5% of the Hispanic Catholics going to confession at least once a year. And you also see that almost half, 49.7%, believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. So, I mean, you see kind of the poll brings in a mixed bag of whether it's good or bad news, but you kind of see some of those highlights, and so that's really good to see as well.
Right. Well, we're going to wrap up here, but I did want to bring Matthew Bunson. You wrote a piece for Catholic News Agency on the poll, and you made a really important point about context. And can you make that point here? The context of this poll, when it was taken, and it was 1,000 Catholics. It was taken. Let's see, it was August
28th to the 29th of Catholic registered voters. So that means that it was right on the heels of the Democratic National Convention. I think Peter Laffin laid out very expertly the very clear effort on the part of the Democrats to appeal to women voters in their convention. But we also have a couple things to bear in mind. First, that this has been an incredibly volatile campaign. Barely a month ago or so, Joe Biden had just dropped out of the race. Kamala Harris was essentially anointed to succeed him. And now we're also heading into the intensity of the debate, where more voters are going to be paying much closer attention to this. We've got the debate coming up shortly on September 10th. And then on September 18th, we have President Trump in a New York courtroom, potentially being sent to prison for the convictions and we don't know what impact that will have on September 18th when he's there. So there are so many things happening right now that were unexpected,
Right.
that we have no idea how this is going to play out, and I suspect it's going to be a very intense couple of months to come.
Right, and so EWTN News and Real Clear Opinion Research, we'll be doing another survey pretty soon here, and so we'll have more results on that survey later in September. So I am inviting our listeners to go to EWTN app, look up EWTN News Nightly, EWTN News In Depth. Both of those shows aired segments on this poll, and you'll want to watch those, and as well as going to ncregister.com and catholicnewsagency.com for more information. You're listening to Register Radio on EWTN News. We'll take a short break, and then Father Roger Landry will join us to talk about missions. Stay tuned for more on Register Radio.
Let's return to Register Radio on EWTN.
Welcome back. I'm Jeanette DeMello, Executive Director of the National Catholic Register and Catholic News Agency, your host on Register Radio. I'm joined by my co-host Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. A few days ago, September 5th, to be exact, we celebrated the feast of St. Teresa of Calcutta. That's Mother Teresa, the founder of the Missionaries of Charity. It was a perfect day for the Pontifical Mission Societies to announce a new leader here in the United States, and that's the new national director. It's someone very well known to us at EWTN, especially the Register. It's Father Roger Landry, one of our regular columnists. So Father Landry is a Catholic chaplain at Columbia University. He's a priest of the Diocese of Fall River, Massachusetts, and he's been appointed by the U.S. bishops National Eucharistic Preacher. Father Landry, it is so good to have you with us now.
It's great to be with you, Jeanette, and with you, Matthew, and thanks for the congratulations on the new appointment.
Yes, absolutely. It's really we look forward to knowing more about what we can do. We're going to get into that in this show. I think it's so important that we realize we're talking about your new role, but we're also talking about our role as a missionary church. And so, Father Landry, first of all, it was so fitting, as I mentioned in the intro, that your new role was announced on the feast day of Mother Teresa. What was the significance of that to you?
So I was actually appointed July 23rd, and I was first trying to have publication of it on July 28th, which would be the feast of the American missionary martyr priest, Father Stanley Rother, to whom I have a devotion. Mm-hmm. That would have allowed me to get the message out to friends faster. The board of the Pontifical Mission Societies thought it was a little bit better to wait until Labor Day. And as soon as we were talking about that, I said, well, then it has to be September 5th, because the mission that Christ has entrusted to all of us, like the mission he entrusted to St. Teresa of Calcutta, is a mission of charity. And so I wanted everything I hope to do as the National Director for the Pontifical Mission Societies to be an expression of Jesus's divine and human love. And so that was a no-brainer for me. What was also very touching to me was when I was preparing to celebrate Mass on September 5th, I didn't realize until the previous day that the gospel on which I would be preaching would be Jesus's words to Peter to put out into the deep and lower your nets for a catch. That Peter followed the Lord, and he did it, even though fish are caught in shallow water and darkness on the Sea of Galilee. He put out into deep water in broad daylight, and he caught the biggest draft of fish in his life. And the church has always, especially John Paul II, used that passage to describe the church's mission in the world, as Jesus took a bunch of fishermen and made them fishers of men. So he seeks to do with all of us. And a side part of that was 25 years ago, when I was preparing for my priestly ordination, the bishop who was going to preach my first Mass said, if you'd have to choose a motto to define your priesthood, what would it be? And I said, Duke and Altum, putting out into the deep and lower your nets for a catch. So the very fact that the Lord gave me that consolation on the day that the news became public was just, for me, a sign that this is what God really wants for me, and that if he arranged all of that, he's got my back.
Seriously.
For what I will be doing is trying to put out into the deep of the oceans of the world and lower the big dragnets of the church to try to bring in as many as we can to experience the incredible love that Mother Teresa experienced and brought.
How beautiful. How beautiful is that? So, first of all, I think we need to say, what will you be doing? What is the Pontifical Mission Societies, and what is your role? What is the role you'll play in more specific terms?
So the Pontifical Mission Societies involves 4 different societies. The most famous is the Society of the Propagation of the Faith. And we first try to help every Catholic in the United States take on an authentic missionary spirituality. As Pope Francis urged us 10 years ago, not to think that the church has a mission, but is a mission. And similarly, that we don't have a mission, we are a mission. That's why God created us. And so to foster that missionary identity among all Catholics in the U.S. And then second, concretely to help the missionaries on the front lines all over the world. We're in 1,100 different dioceses that are poor, a lot of the times where the gospel is still young, where the people are growing in their faith. And the United States of America is by far the biggest donor to the missions across the globe. And so part of my job is to bring in as many collaborators as possible to help us bring the joy of the gospel out to those whom God created, sent Jesus to redeem, and hopes to celebrate in love forever with us in heaven. And so that twofold mission is really what we do. And concretely, one of the big tasks is every October on the 3rd Sunday, we have World Mission Sunday. And whatever Catholics in any of the 17,000 parishes throughout the United States give in the second collection in their parishes that day, come to the Pontifical Mission Societies so that we're able to fund the various projects, the building of the churches, the building of Catholic schools, the building of hospitals to care for those whom the rest of society neglects, catechetical centers, to build seminaries in religious houses to form the future generation of priests and religious from these various countries. We do all of that. And so it's big responsibilities. I'm excited to take them on, but we can't do it alone. And so I'm hoping that Jeanette DeMello and Matthew Bunson and everybody else listening to us will be big co-workers with me in that vineyard, because the harvest is ripe.
Well, Father, you got the news of your appointment, I believe, while you were on the Eucharistic pilgrimage. You were spending 65 days on a missionary journey to bring Christ in the Eucharist across the U.S. Seems like a perfectly fitting moment again. How does that Eucharistic revival and our missionary role, that mandate, come together?
So as Cardinal Tagle, who's now my new boss, said at the closing Mass of the Eucharistic Congress in Indianapolis, that the Eucharist is Jesus' self-giving. And if we receive him well, we become a gift for others. And we don't just give ourselves, but we try to give him. That leads directly into the whole church's mission. And so to be a Catholic is to be Eucharistic. And to be Eucharistic, he said, is for us to be missionary. And when I heard that, I said, how eloquent is that? Because it's just so true. And for me, after 65 days, carrying Jesus out of our churches into the streets of the cities and towns of the northeastern quarter of the U.S., that sort of symbolizes what I'm hoping to do for the world, because when we bring the gospel to people, it's not just words. It's meant to be the word made flesh. It's meant to be Jesus himself. And so the Eucharistic pilgrimage leads into the church's pilgrimage through time, trying to bring everybody to walk with us toward the eternal Jerusalem. And what a great consolation of it was, like when I got to Indianapolis, because I was on the road the entire time, I still hadn't heard confirmation that the Vatican had approved of my nomination from the Pontifical Mission Society Board of Bishops and lay people in the U.S. So I saw Cardinal Tagle there, and we had worked together when I was at the United Nations before. He immediately recognized me, and he came on up and said, "Congratulations, Roger, on the new appointment." I said, "Well, I haven't gotten confirmation of that yet, Eminence." And he says, "I just gave you verbal confirmation. You'll get the letter in a couple of days." And so perfect. To hear the confirmation from the papal legate to the Eucharistic Congress right there about my new assignment was just yet one more caress of God as Absolutely. I prepare to take on this role.
And of course, your new column at ncregister.com is on this very topic. You talk about these very themes and how beautiful it is. And of course, this is also in our Eucharistic revival in the U.S. It's the year of mission. We were sent out from the Congress into a year of mission. So this is very important for all of us. I want to plug Matthew Bunson, who's going to be going to the International Eucharistic Congress next week in Quito. And he will be bringing us news of Eucharistic mission throughout the world. So, Father Landry, we're so grateful. You do have our support, you have our prayers, and we'll be covering the work that you do. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, Jeanette, and I can't wait to share with Register readers much more about what we do. And so now that part of my responsibility is actually having to publicize the work of the Pontifical Mission Societies, I'll be far more regular as a columnist for the Register than I've been able to be as a chaplain to the Catholics at Columbia. So looking forward to that continued co-work.
Me too. So remember, for more news, analysis, and commentary, check out the National Catholic Register online at ncregister.com. Thanks for joining us here on Register Radio on EWTN, together with Matthew Bunson and today's producer, Michael McCall. I'm Jeanette DeMello, and until next week, I pray that God bless you.